Okay, so looking at lesson 7 exercises here. Let me pull up the assignment. We're going to be looking at A, B, D, and H. All right, so A here, the basic idea is just kind of learning how sentences work in Hebrew. So I'm going to put this over here so that I don't see the answers while I'm going through here. As you learned in within the form of um, the form of the verb in Hebrew changes depending on who the subject is. So if you have a first person subject in the perfect conjugation, instead of zachar, you're going to get zacharti. Okay, and because that subject is indicated by the form of the verb, you don't need a separate word to identify the subject. So in Hebrew, zachar could be a complete sentence because zachar indicates both the subject and the verb. Zachar is the form of remember that goes with third person singular. So we would translate this either as he remembered or it remembered. It's important to remember that when you've got the perfect conjugation, you're talking about simple past action for your translations here. That's not because the conjugation is, or that's not because the perfect conjugation is always past time. The perfect conjugation is actually less about time and more about what we call aspect. The perfect conjugation portrays an action as a completed whole rather than something that's unfolding or ongoing or in progress. So, the reason why we usually translate the perfect conjugation as past tense in English is because without any other context, the English past tense is the most natural tense to designate or identify completed action. You can have completed action in the future. In English, I might say something like, by the time I get home, dinner will be done. So I'm talking about dinner being done. It's finished, it's completed. Dinner will be cooked. Dinner will be prepared. Dinner will be ready. All of those depict, well, actually that's, maybe I should, instead of a like a to be verb, what if I say by the time I get home, um, my children will have fallen asleep. So when I use that future perfect in English, that's portraying a future action as completed. So it's important to start distinguishing in your mind the difference between time, which would be past, present, future, and aspect, which would be progressive or perfective. In English, we have a simple present tense, I eat. We also have a present progressive. Progressive refers to the aspect. Present refers to the time. So in the present progressive, we would have something like I am eating. It's present time, but it's progressive aspect. In the past tense, we would have maybe something like a past progressive, he was eating, and a past perfect, he had eaten. He was eating portrays the eating as unfolding or ongoing. He was in the process of eating. But the past perfect, he had eaten, portrays the act of eating as completed in the past. And so those are just some examples of how even in English we can distinguish between the time of an event or an action and the aspect of an event or action. Remember, aspect has to do with the completedness or the progression or ongoingness. And so in Hebrew, our two primary conjugations are the perfect conjugation and the imperfect conjugation. And so the perfect conjugation has to do with perfective aspect, completed action. Whereas the imperfect conjugation, which we'll learn more about next semester, that has to do with progressive action or ongoing action. We often use the future tense to describe that in English, because obviously if an action isn't completed, well, the future is the most natural time where that takes place in English. All right, so all that to kind of distinguish between the conjugation. Conjugation is related more to aspect than it is to time, but in your English translations, especially in elementary Hebrew, I want you to focus on translating the perfect conjugation with the English past tense, simple past tense. So Zachar should be he remembered, unless you have an explicit subject. So with an explicit subject, we don't need the he here. So we wouldn't translate Zachar Ha'ish as he remembered the man. We would translate this simply as the man remembered. Now, it could be confusing here because you might think, well, is the man the subject of the sentence, the man remembered? Or is the man the direct object of the sentence? Was the man the one who was remembered? He remembered the man. In Hebrew, if your if your direct object is definite, we have a definite article here, you're going to get a particle, which it doesn't look like is getting used here. Have you guys... I'm sure... Okay, yeah. So up here, when there's a definite direct object, the word ate is placed in front of the subject. Sometimes this ate will get connected with what we call a makaf. This is basically like a hyphen in English, and it will be et instead of ate when that makaf is there. But that is what designates a definite direct object. And so we know that ha'ish in number 2 is not the direct object because it's definite, but it lacks that ate particle. Okay, so this would only be the direct object. Since it's definite, it would only be the direct object if ate was there. All right, so Zachar remembered. Now, if you don't have an explicit subject, then you use a pronoun, he remembered or it remembered. Zachar ha'ish, the man remembered. Okay, so in Hebrew word order, your usual word order in a Hebrew sentence is you're going to have your verb first. In English, we usually have the subject first, and then the verb, and then the direct object, and then the indirect object, like that. Well, in Hebrew, you have the verb first, and then you usually have the subject directly after the verb. And then you'll usually have the definite or indefinite direct object after the subject. So, Zachar ha'ish, the man remembered. Ani zacharti. Here, we don't need ani. It doesn't make the subject any more explicit because zacharti, it's understood that that means I remembered. So when you see ani here, when it's unnecessary, especially when it's fronted like this, because usually our subject will be after the verb, that means that there's some sort of emphasis at play usually. So this would be something like I remembered if you're in a conversation where maybe you're arguing with your friend over who remembered to do something, and he says, hey, I remembered to take out the trash or whatever. And you say, no, I remembered. That's when you would have that ani, and it would be fronted like this. So this is sort of in an emphatic position here. Ani zacharti. So that would just be I remembered. Number 4, zachara. Zachara here. This is the 3FS form of remember. So because we don't have an explicit subject, we're just going to translate this as she remembered. Number 5, zachara ha'isha. So here, zachara remembered. Who remembered? Ha'isha. The woman remembered. We don't need the woman she remembered, or she the woman remembered, or she remembered the woman, or anything like that. It's just zachara ha'isha. The woman remembered. Number 6, zachartem. Zachartem remembered. But here, this particular form, the tem suffix applies specifically to the 2MP. So second person masculine plural. You all, sirs. You all masculine. You remembered. Number 7, Zacharu ha'anashim. Remember, ha'anashim is the plural form of isha, or I'm sorry, of ish rather. So this is the men remembered. Zacharu, remembered. It's masculine plural, so it would be they remembered. But here the subject is explicit, so we don't need to say they remembered. We can just say the men remembered. We don't want to say the men they remembered. We just want to say the men remembered. All right, number 8, we've got Zacharu Hanashim. Okay, now I said this was 3MP. This is actually 3CP in the perfect. That C means common, so this form is used whether it's masculine or feminine. It's common to both genders. So Zacharu Hanashim is the men remembered. Zacharu Hanashim is the women remembered. Batach. This means trusted. It's third person masculine singular. So if there were no subject, we would just say he trusted or it trusted. But here, Habain, we have Batach Habain, the son trusted. Batacha Habat. So here we have Habat, the daughter. And since this is feminine, we have to change from the third masculine singular form, Batach, to the third feminine singular form, Batacha Habat, the daughter remembered. Number 11, we've got Ata Batachta. Ata Batachta. Okay, so Ata is the you masculine singular pronoun. You. Batachta, the Tav Patach here, or Tav Kametz here, that resembles the Tav Kametz in the pronoun. So this is the 2MS form of Batach. So you remembered. Number 12, we have Atain Batachten. Batachten, this is the second person feminine plural form. And here we have the pronoun for you all ladies, you all feminine, trusted. I think I might have said remembered up here. We're still on trusted. But this would basically be you all trusted. Number 13, we have Batachnu. Batachnu, this again, it means trusted, but here the new suffix tells us this is 1CP, so first common plural. This is we trusted. Number 14, we have Halach Hanavi. Halach, he went or he walked. Who walked? Hanavi, the prophet. So the prophet walked or the prophet went. And then number 15, we have Haim Halahu. Haim Halahu. So Halahu, this is the 3CP form. This would be walked or went. Without an explicit subject, it would just be they went or they walked. But here we have an explicit pronoun which just emphasizes the they. So they walked rather than someone else walking. Or they went. All right, so that's A. Let's look at B here. All right, so now we're going to start looking at the direct object. Let me move this over a little. All right, so number 1, Lakach sus. There's a couple possibilities here. Lakach is certainly our verb. So we have took or captured. And then we have horse. Now we have to figure out how these two words relate to each other. Lakach is certainly the verb. Is sus the subject? Is sus a direct object? it's ambiguous because you could properly translate this as he took a horse. Since Seuss is not definite, it does not need a definite direct object marker. But you could also say a horse took. Now, the problem here is lakach is the type of verb, it's a transitive verb, and it almost always requires a direct object. If you just say, he took or he seized or he captured, it almost demands he captured what. All right, so if we really need a direct object, and Seuss is the only candidate for that direct object, then it's probably better to translate this as he took a horse rather than a horse took or a horse captured. So let's move it up. Yes, he took a horse. And again, we don't have the ate particle up here because this is not definite, and that's why we say a horse rather than the horse. Number 2, Lakach ate Hasus. So here the difference is we have a definite article on Seuss, and that's why we get the ate particle. So this would just be he took the horse. All right, number 3, Lakach et Hasus. The only difference here is that we've got the makaf. There's no real change in meaning between these two, but you'll notice when the makaf is added, the sere shifts to a segel. Okay. All right, that's number. So this would again be translated. He took the horse. No real difference in meaning between 2 and 3, just a difference in spelling. All right, number 4, shalach. Shalach means sent, or it could mean stretched out, but sent. Again, sent is one of those verbs that kind of requires a direct object. If you just send, it sort of begs send what? What is being sent here? Well, we've got a definite direct object, ha-na'ar, the servant or the boy. So he sent what or whom? What or whom? He sent the boy or the servant, depending on how you translate ha-na'ar. All right, then number 4, shalach et ha-kohen. So instead of shalach et ha-na'ar, he sent the boy, we have shalach et ha-kohen, he sent the priest. Again, the priest can't be the subject because it's marked as a definite direct object. So he sent the priest. Number 6, we have shema. This is listened or heard. So who listened or heard? Davar. Well, davar, a word doesn't listen or hear. So davar is probably not a good subject, but a davar does get heard. It does get listened to. So it makes a perfect direct object for shema. So shema would be listened or heard, listened to or heard a word. Who listened to or who heard a word? Well, we don't have an explicit subject, so we'll just have to use a pronoun based on the form. This is the 3MS form. So we would say he heard a word or he listened to a word, or it heard a word or it listened to a word. Now, since we're talking about a word here, this is probably a person rather than a thing. So it heard a word or it listened to a word doesn't really work. So we would translate this as he heard a word or he listened to a word. Number 7, Shema ate ha davar. The difference here is that davar is now definite. So he heard the word. And that's why we have the ate particle, because we have a definite direct object now. He heard the word. And then Shema et hamelech. He heard the king. There we go. All right, so that's B. We'll go down to D now. Focusing on the negative. All right, now I don't want you guys to get confused with the way he translates these. He's only providing the parenthetical information in these translations as an example of how the emphasis is working. So you have to remember that the emphasis falls on the word negated. So in this first one, we have no negative particle. Nothing is negated. This is simply Natan hana'ar et ha-beged. Natan gave. Who gave? Hana'ar. We know this is the subject because if the boy was given, it's definite, so it must have the definite direct object marker here, and it doesn't. So Hana'ar is the subject. The boy gave. The boy gave what? Et. Okay, so et, this is what was given. Habeged. The boy gave the clothing. So that's our sentence here in number 1. Now, numbers 2, 3, and 4 are just going to negate different parts of this sentence for different emphasis. So in number 2, the word that's negated is Natan. So this would then be translated, instead of the boy gave the clothing, this would now be translated as the boy did not give the clothing, perhaps he took the clothing, or he kept it, okay? So the thing that's negated is Natan. Your translation should not have this information in it. Your translation for all of these should be the same. Maybe you underline give here, since that's what's negated. The idea is, what we're emphasizing is what the boy did not do. We're emphasizing the verb. He did not give the clothing. He did something else with it. Maybe he kept it. Number 3, here hana'ar is negated. So we would translate this as the boy did not give the clothing, someone else did. So maybe the girl did. The boy did not give the garment, the girl did. Okay, again, the girl did, that's not part of your translation. These should be translated exactly the same. What he's pointing out here is what we're emphasizing is hana'ar. We're not saying nobody gave clothing. We're only saying that the boy did not give clothing. Up here in number 2, we're not saying that the boy didn't do anything with the clothing. We're just saying he didn't give the clothing. And then down here in number 3, we're not saying that the boy didn't give anything. We're just saying he didn't give the clothing or the garment. Et habeged is what is negated. So the boy did not give the clothing. That's what's emphasized. So to explain that, maybe he gave something else, like he gave the food or something, or he gave the shoes. Again, he gave the shoes is not part of your translation. In your translation, it will be the same in all of these 3. It's just what is being negated is what changes. So what is the difference in meaning between all these? You can translate them the same way, but they do have slightly different meanings. The meaning in number 2 is that the boy, we're not saying the boy didn't do anything with the clothes, we're just saying he didn't give them. And number 3, we're not saying that nobody gave the clothing or the garment, we're just saying the boy didn't do that. And number 4, we're not saying the boy didn't give anything, we're just saying he didn't give the garment or the clothing. All right, so that's the nuanced kind of difference between what is negated with that particle. And again, the thing negated is the thing that immediately follows that particle. All right, let's look at H here. This will be our last section. So let me move this over a little bit. All right, number 1, Zachar HaMelech et HaMalkut. All right, so again, we're going to start verb, subject, object is our expectation as we go through these. Verb, Zachar, okay, remembered. Who remembered? HaMelech. The king remembered. The king remembered what? Et HaMalkut. The kingdom. The king remembered the kingdom. Number 2, Lakachti na'ar. Again, lakach this is one of these verbs that sort of demands an object. Took what? Okay, so na'ar could Well, actually, na'ar cannot be our subject because this form of lakach, this requires a 1CS subject. And na'ar is a third person noun. It's not, it can't be, unless you were saying like, I, a boy, captured or took or seized, but that's not what's being said here. There's no ani, there's no I. So na'ar does not match the person of the verb. So na'ar cannot be the subject of the verb. Therefore, it's the object. So I took a servant or I took a boy. All right, number 3, halahu ha'aim. All right, there's a couple reasons why we know that ha'aim is going to be the subject. First of all, it's in the location we expect immediately after the verb. Second of all, it has a definite article but does not have the definite direct object marker. Therefore, it's not going to be a direct object. It's going to be a subject. And then finally, it does match the person, gender, and number of the verb, which is third feminine singular. Ha'aim is third feminine singular. And so we have the mother went or the mother walked. All right, number 4, we have shalhu ha'elim et hanavi. Shalahu is sent. It's plural. Who sent? Ha'elim, the gods. The gods sent. The gods sent what? Et hanavi. The gods sent the prophet. All right, number 5. Shema kohen davar. So here both kohen and davar are indefinite. Forgetting the meaning of Shema for a minute, just normal word order is going to tell you that the subject is probably the word immediately after the verb. So kohen is probably the subject of Shema, and then davar would be the direct object, even though it's indefinite. All right? So that's just basic word order. But then when we bring the meaning of Shema in, Shema is listen. Well, what usually would be the object of listening? Davar wouldn't be the subject. A word can't hear anything. A word can't listen to anything, so it can't be the subject. But it does make a perfect object of Shema. So with all of those clues, we can gather that this should be a priest heard a word. And then finally, number 6, we have lekachtem et hasusot. So lekachtem, you caught or seized or captured or took what? The mares or the horses, feminine. You took the mares. There you go. All right, so that is all of the exercises from last week in lesson 7 here. Just looking quickly through lesson 8, the lesson for this week. What I want you to know is this is helpful material for understanding why vowels do what they do when you add suffixes to nouns and verbs. This is not information that in previous versions of this course, this chapter was skipped over altogether. Okay, this stuff is explanatory. This is stuff that you really need to know for composing Hebrew. But for reading Hebrew, this is more just helpful information. So be aware of it. Understand what's being said here and how this works. But this isn't going to be information that, is essential for your understanding. Now, it's going to be helpful for your understanding. It's going to help you as you understand how verbs change the vowels and stuff like that. If you're looking at all these different forms of verbs through the conjugations and the paradigms, and you're like, why in the world do the vowels keep changing? This is going to explain why that happens. If you're wondering why is it that the vowels change in the nouns when we add the hirik yod mem and the holam vav tav and all of this, this is going to help you explain why they change. There are some vowel changes that are just unexplained or unpredictable, and that's mentioned here. You just have to memorize them. But this chapter, if it's confusing to you the first time you read through it, just periodically come back to it and revisit it and see if it makes more sense as you go through the semester. Because, again, if you don't get everything on the first pass through, that it's not going to be a huge hindrance. This is more a helpful chapter than anything else. So I just want to kind of put this chapter in perspective. All right. That's it. That's Futato for last week and this week. Let's take a look at the vocabulary here. Just see if there's any assistance I can offer. Lifnei. Lifnei before, it can also mean in the presence of, or something like that. Before, not temporally. This doesn't mean like earlier than. Before is spatial here. It means like in the presence of or in front of. This literally is the preposition lamed, to, and then pene comes from the idea of the face of. So to the face of is like before or opposite or in the presence of. Min, my mnemonic for this was minus. So if you take, 3 from 5, you get 2. Well, that's 5 minus, I guess that's kind of backwards, but min is from or out of, maybe away from, so I think of minus, you're subtracting, you're taking away from. Al, on, this on here is location or spatial, like on top of, but al can also mean on account of or for the sake of, maybe even sometimes because of. Im means with. I don't really have a good mnemonic for this one. And the prepositions are kind of hard to have good mnemonics for. Tachat, when you've got this blue syllable here, this means this is the accented syllable. So tachat, not tachat, tachat. Tachat means under or beneath. And I have a really dumb mnemonic for this one. I just see a magician with a top hat, and he's going to pull a rabbit out of his hat. So he's standing there, maybe with his hand on the brim of the hat, and what you don't know is there's already a rabbit under the hat, under tachat. So that's my dumb mnemonic. Tachat is under. That way when he pulls the hat off and pulls out the rabbit, it was there, it was under the hat the whole time, okay? So tachat is under or beneath. All right. 2. L, to or for the sake of. When it says to, that's usually directional. It usually describes motion. The difference between to and, or I should say between L and lamed, as far as to goes, they're pretty similar. There's a lot of overlap there, but L usually is more related to motion, and lamed is more related to destination. Whoops. So, lamed preposition is usually it's going to have less emphasis on the motion of going somewhere and more emphasis on where you end up, whereas L will have a little bit more emphasis sometimes on the process of toward or into, that sort of idea. All right. Bait has a ton of meanings. These are just a few of them. In or at, these are spatial. With is kind of spatial as well, but it's also instrumental. So if I hit the rabbit with a stick, then I might use bait stick to mean with a stick. All right, so there's a lot of functions that bait can have. Don't try to find sort of like an anchor meaning that all of these different connotations are rooted to. It's just used in a lot of different ways. So you might even if you do flashcards or something, you might have multiple flashcards for bait, each with a different meaning. All right, betoch within, betoch, I don't really have a mnemonic for that one. And then the cough preposition would be like. So if I run like the wind, that would be cowind. According to would also be like in conformity with, that sort of idea. And then again, the lamed preposition here is to or for, often indicates purpose. All right, I guess that's it. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Other than that, I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.